That's like my cheapest spiritual music that I got that won't get me copyright struck. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Hori Sheet Show. Tonight, we're going to listen to one of my favorite YouTube people, or I guess it's my favorite yogi, and that's Shunyamurti from the Sat Yoga Institute. And we're going to hear him talk about restoring our planet's energy field. This was a video I meant to play a while back, and I couldn't find it again. Well, I just found it recently, and I don't think I've watched the whole thing, so I'm going to actually watch the whole hour and 3-minute long video clip here, offer my commentary while I cook a steak. And after this video, I'm going to play another one. Not sure which one. So, yep. If you're joining me, just say hi in the chat. Let me know you're here. And hope you enjoy. Without further ado, let us begin the broadcast. Let's see something first. All right, that's good.
The key understanding for transformation is that everything is a function of vibrational frequency. We can talk about the VFC level, the vibrational frequency of consciousness. It is the capacity to regulate, modulate, raise, and sometimes lower that frequency that will determine one's capacity to navigate through reality successfully. The shift in vibrational frequency should happen from the top down. In other words, from the level of pure spirit, pure consciousness itself, the vibrational frequency of the various subtle and gross bodies will shift their vibrational frequency. But it can also happen from the bottom up. Why? Because vibrational frequency can be altered by the simple matter of adding a particular kind of crystal to the space in which consciousness is vibrating. And if that crystal contains a vibrational frequency slightly higher, a very, very slight shift in frequency will change your world. Your vibrational frequency level determines your world. This is a very important secret because you don't have to fight with your world to change it. You change your frequency and your world changes along with that. And so everything we're learning here in terms of meditation is how to lift the vibrational frequency to the level of the Absolute. There's nothing else that really needs to be learned but that. Now, all molecules have a crystalline form. And so I know that everyone here has probably seen that famous movie about water, right? And crystals, ice crystals. And if someone puts high meditative energy into the water molecule itself will take a different shape, right? It will hold the essence of that vibrational frequency. And then if someone drinks that water that has taken on the frequency of someone who is at an avataric level of consciousness, they're going to jump, at least temporarily, in their frequency. And if they are drinking water that was cursed by black magic practitioners and you drink that, you're not going to feel very good.
Now, there is definitely a very tangible way to maybe prove what he's saying with this whole crystals and water and stuff like this thing. So I went to a class with an ex-girlfriend of mine, and it was a healing class. It was all about gems and stones and Reiki. So what they ended up teaching us was the different properties of the different gems that they had. And they did an experiment where they basically took some water and they had a big glass jug of water on one side of the table and then another glass of water with a single stone in it, one of the rocks. I don't know which one they had in it. And they asked everybody to take sips from each glass and tell everybody, how the water tastes, what difference there was. And right away, like immediately, everybody noticed that the water with the stone, the gem in it, tasted smoother, tasted better. It was just it might as well have been a whole different brand of water. And that right there turned me into a believer. And you can easily do that. Just grab your favorite gemstone, maybe rinse it off and in some water, and then drop it in your next glass of water you want to drink, and see how it tastes. Try different stones. There's also this theory of you could take a glass of water and hold it in your hands and think about manifesting what you want. And you put that energy into the water, and then you drink it, and you get what you manifested, whether it's money or, anything. So there's definitely something to water. There's definitely something to charging it and the molecular structure, and for good or for bad, like he said, if a black magic practitioner cursed the water, I wouldn't doubt it that there might be some negative effects. So interesting stuff.
And it can create literally very, very grave problems for people. And so all of us are always not only in a state of vibrational frequency, but we are emanating that frequency, and we are receiving it. If the frequency level is very strong and very high, it produces a protective auric shield so that negative vibrations can't get through and can't harm you. So it's a very important protective envelope of subtle energetic energy fields because there are several layers that can be constructed to keep out negative energies, including radiation if one is very strong, meaning nuclear radiation. The vibrational frequency of someone who is in a very high state of consciousness will affect the local space around them and any matter that is in that local space. And so I remember at the ashram that I was studying at in India, most of my time there, was very concerned that the people who were preparing food were the ones at the highest level of vibrational frequency. And they literally tested everyone there. And the guy who was putting out the most consistent, blissful love energy, they gave the name Yogi Raj to. And they had him stand there in front of these big pots, of lentils, and he would just stir it all day. And he was in a love trance, He didn't want to do anything else but just stir the lentils and put love into them. And you would eat those lentils and you go into a trance yourself. I mean, it had that effect. You didn't have to meditate. You didn't have to just show up for lunch and you'd be liberated. It was really that powerful. So I always wanted to work in the kitchen next to the guy, and see if I could resonate with him and, stir the rice or whatever I was given to do in the same way. But you had to earn your right to even, participate in it. This was the highest activity in the ashram, okay? The teachers didn't have to be at such a high level, but the people at the kitchen did, because they were changing the molecules of what you were going to take in, and that was going to affect you far more than the concepts of the teachings. So this was the real core.
And so if that is true, I mean, that plays right into how we are able to heal people with our hands or our thoughts. I mean, if we're directing our energy, we can do various different things with it. Hey, Intu, how's it going? Welcome, welcome. I hope you take in some good info here. This is going to be a pretty long video and probably a couple hour long stream. I don't know if I'm just going to stream this stuff tonight and then play games, or if I'm just not going to play games. I don't know what I'm going to do, but this stream, at least for a good 2 hours, is going to be his videos and my commentary, and anything that I might have some firsthand experience with or knowledge with, I'm going to be piping in like this. So yeah, I wonder, I bet this is very closely related. Whatever he's talking about with the guy stirring the lentils and resonating with the lentils and the people eating it, getting a sort of a high. This goes hand in hand with Reiki. It's got to be like Reiki. All this stuff connects with each other. So interesting.
Core of the ashram's engine.
Hey, Dr. Bass Ackwood's in the his house. What's up, dude? Hope you enjoy the show.
That this was the real core of the ashram's engine, that through the emanation of this divine love and bliss and wisdom that was coming out of the yogis who were preparing the food, transformed literally the physical organism through that vibrational frequency.
Hey, LA Young.
Transmitted to the cellular structure of the body.
Welcome, welcome.
In the same way, people who take certain psychedelic substances like cannabis or ayahuasca or mushrooms, what's really happening is a crystal is coming in from one of those substances and passing through the blood-brain barrier, and that crystal, as long as it still holds that vibrational frequency, it's changing the way that your brain is vibrating and allowing an entirely different level of information to come in, at least for whatever, a few minutes if it's DMT, or a few hours if it's psilocybin, or a longer period if it's ayahuasca. But it's bringing in a huge amount of higher level vibrational information than your ego would allow in otherwise. Now, the problem with trying to get the information that way is this, and I think Terence McKenna is our example, unfortunately. And I think McKenna's error was this. He didn't do any meditation or purification of the soul. Instead of that, he went right into taking the substances. And when he was on these massive doses of psilocybin, he was still in an ego state, trying to deal with this information and energy that was way too overwhelming for him. And so what happens when you get information that you are not ready to integrate or deal with, you have to block it. And the soul first tries to block it on a software level with the sensor. But when you're under massive doses of psilocybin, that isn't going to work anymore. Your sensor is gone. You have no internal subtle ways of defending yourself against an overdose of truth. And so although truth heals, it can also kill. And I believe that he got his brain tumor because that was the only way he could block the amount of information that was coming to him in his brain through through taking this dose that created very high level crystalline vibrations that were bringing in, because the brain is a transceiver, information that he was now attuned to that his ego could not tolerate and could not digest, could not receive, had to reject, and it had to literally block it physically with a tumor. This is
I wonder if this is why some people seem to have more visual experiences with psychedelics and others seem to have more spiritual experiences. I don't get much visual distortion. Like, I see, hear people talking about like stuff is melting and their whole world is transforming, and sometimes I get that, but I really have to try to see that kind of stuff on psychedelics. For me, it's just like it puts me in meditation mode. It makes me just sit in one spot and just think, and the stuff that comes to me is profound. One day I ought to restream one of my videos that I streamed for like 3 hours one night when I was tripping, and I talked about angels and demons and energy and good and evil and God, and like I just put all this stuff together that was coming through my head, and I was in VR actually playing with this sand dust game, and it was like I was creating the visual with I was creating what I was talking about with the dust in the game, and it was really cool. And I thought, I was just talking. I know it was making sense to me, but I didn't know if anybody else would really, if it would resonate with anybody. So I pretty much hid that video like a day or two after I uploaded it. And somebody reached out to me and was like, "Hey man, what'd you do with that video?" I'm like, "What video are you talking about?" "Well, it was this one where you were blah, 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 blah." And I'm like, "Oh, I deleted that one. I thought it was nonsense, And you're like, "No, man, put it back up. That was gold, man. That was good stuff." And that video is responsible for me making some friends, some really good high-level spiritual friends. So, yeah, we get downloads on this stuff, and he'll talk a little bit about that, I believe, in the next portion here.
One of the dangers and why I don't recommend taking those kinds of substances until at least one has been prepared through purification practices that are natural, because all that these substances are doing are mimicking crystals that are produced endogenously by the brain itself. That's why they work. If your brain didn't produce those chemicals when you are in higher meditative states, then these substances would not have any effect on you. But what they do is fool the brain into thinking that you have reached a high meditative state, and now you're tuning to these higher frequency levels of information and you're ready to receive them. But if you're not, because the brain got tuned but the ego didn't, then there's going to be a glitch, and the system is not going to function accurately, and it will be dealt with karmically. Okay? So that's just a cautionary tale, but I think it's useful to us to understand that this principle operates whether one is taking in exogenously substances, or even if just one is in an energy field that has too high a vibrational frequency for you to deal with. And that's why a lot of visitors who come here get sick. And they can't even come to classes. They'll have headaches, they'll have stomach aches, they'll have all kinds of physical symptoms because they could not take the shock of a differential vibrational frequency level than what they were used to. And if it gets raised too high, then people run away screaming and never want to come back. So that's why we have to modulate how we present vibrationally who we are and what we're doing, and why certain kinds of teachings have to be kept to those who are prepared for them. Okay, now this understanding of vibrational frequency can be looked at in a historical context as well. When you go back to the Copper Age, the previous yuga before Kali Yuga, the world was brought to a state of peace, planetary peace, through the maintenance of its vibrational frequency by very, very, very powerful yogis. And how they did this was by extending and magnifying the vibrational resonance energies so that they would be broadcast and connected in a grid that was planet-wide. And the way they did this was building gigantic pyramids at various key places on grid lines around the Earth. And taking the pyramids, let's say from Egypt, there was a king's chamber and a queen's chamber. And if you would go into those chambers, and I'm talking about thousands of years ago when these things were still functioning, and it was a male and a female yogi who would go into these chambers, but they were the most adept, the highest level frequency holders who would go into these. And sometimes there were several pyramids next to each other and with different pairs of yogis, and they would all have to resonate at the same chakra 7 frequency. And that would be broadcast because of the nature of the pyramid shape and the way it was constructed and what was made of it and the crystals inside of it, etc. It would connect with pyramids that had yogis in all parts of the world. There were such pyramids in Eastern Europe, they were in India, the Indian temples were shaped the same way, had the same functions. China had them, and there's even in what is now Antarctica, which was originally in a different place, and of course the Mayan pyramids, etc. And you also had yogis where there were no pyramids who would go to the top of mountains, and they would be able to capture the vibrational frequency and pass it on. To root it, it had to get rerouted so that it covered the entire planet, and it created an energy field that literally was strong enough to enter into the brain of every inhabitant and keep them functioning at chakra 6 or 7. And so there was peace. And there was never any conflict. There were no wars during that whole period. And the system functioned for a long period of time until what happened was they no longer were able to produce yogis who could do the work. Because to go into these pyramids, which was a gigantic isolation chamber, right? Totally dark, totally free of interference patterns. You were absolutely alone. You would go into a deep meditative state and become absolutely bodiless and empty. And in this nothingness, you would pick up the highest God self vibrations, and they would be magnified and bounce back and fill the space with such intense energy that then it would shoot out of the top and the sides of the pyramid and connect with others, and it would be broadcast around the planet. But you had to be able to tolerate that vibrational frequency for a very long period of time. And you had to be able to maintain the silence and the focus and the concentration for hours at a time. Now, once this was created, the pyramid would continue to vibrate, and there were crystals inside it as well that held the vibration like a battery for long periods. So they didn't have to live in there. They would just go in when the vibrational frequency started to go down and give it a battery boost, but it maintained itself. And it was also a way to transmit information. So people could know what was going on in Mexico, in Egypt, or in China, or whatever, and if something had to be done in those different areas to balance a certain negative energy field, they could do that. And they could ally to create certain effects where there were weak spots in the what we could call the pranic meridians of Gaia. And it was kept at a very consistent level. But then once the power to do that had been lost, and there were no longer any or a sufficient number of yogis who had that power, the system broke down. And those civilizations fell, they were invaded.
Welcome, Near. I hope you have constipation. I hope that last little pebble shit bothers you and you get to watch the stream for 40 whole minutes. What's up? Yeah, this is interesting to hear, his take on what the pyramids are. And I really wonder, is that really what they were for? Because they're not being used right now. And I can definitely understand how it could have been used as like a news broadcasting sort of thing, because I know personally I can go leave my body and go teleport somewhere and see what the hell's going on and come back in and call that person up and freak them out. So I know that's possible. That's not a stretch to me. So very fascinating to hear, what we may have been doing and what we may have lost in this society.
And the information about how to maintain those frequencies and all of the wisdom that had been accumulated was completely destroyed. So there was at that point a cut. It was the end of the Copper Age. Once that happened, huge earth changes happened and an entirely new yuga began where that information and that power had been lost. And then we get a much lower level of yogic teaching that still comes from great beings like Buddha, Jesus, etc., but they were not nearly at the level of the beings of the previous yuga. And so we don't even know what our potential is or have any sense of how the world really functions when its residents are in true God consciousness. But it is this that we are called upon now to recreate, to return to. Nothing less will do if we are to save the planet. And some people are interested in doing that. So there is a civilization that is now dying. It must die to take the people suffering out of their misery, but there must be a rebirth and a redreaming, and that can only happen if our own vibrational frequency or that of sufficient number of yogis consistently is able to draw in that information and that power to shift the quantum wave function of the unified field that underlies this hologram.
I'm ready for it, baby.
And do so with absolute accuracy. So that's what the training is about. And that training can only succeed if one has no psychological resistances to attaining liberation from the ego. And in the second stage meditation, we are dealing with the resistances of the heart, of our resistance to loving everyone absolutely and unconditionally. Not loving their egos, mind you, that's not what's being talked about, but loving their real being by seeing through the ego, seeing what is real, and enabling the real within each being to emerge from its hidden, obscured, repressed, forgotten place in the unconscious or in the superconscious, it comes to the same, and bring it fully into consciousness by vibrating it at that same frequency, by sending the same kind of crystalline energy into every body, mind, and heart, so that that kind of vibrational level can be consistently maintained by someone until they can do the work of self-purification and then establish themselves independently at that level. And this has always been the function of those who are transmitting the Dharma to the levels that it can be transmitted. And of course, at the highest levels, it's not about talk. It's simply a function of the actual work of remaining in that highest level of frequency that has to be in total silence, emptiness of ego, and the emptiness, the absolute nothingness that we talked about last night in somewhat of a comic way, but which is very serious. That absolute nothingness is the place from which the infinite potencies of the presence of God consciousness emerges. So the nothingness and the emptiness is fullness and the capacity to create a cosmos and sustain it and transform it. It has that power if we know how to use it and have earned the right to use it through our own purification and our own earning of that function in the planetary ecosystem that is granted only by the direct will of God. So it can't be stolen, it can't be abused, it can't be misused by black magic practitioners. They can achieve certain levels of psychic capacity, but they cannot reach those levels that could threaten a liberated avataric being. But only one at that level would be able to deal with such negative energies. And so the process has to involve the letting go of the ego and all of its disturbances and illusions and false desires and its fears. But that's just the beginning. Then we start the real work of the purification of the heart. And it's after that that we go into the third stage, where we deal with the final resistances, which are the most difficult and dangerous to encounter. And one has to be prepared, and one has to be willing to take the ultimate risks that are involved, because it's a very, very high stakes endeavor, and it's a razor's edge, and only those who are completely pure of heart can or even should undertake to enter into that stage, or will be able to do so, and probably will have no interest in doing so if they haven't reached that stage where they are called from within to achieve this. But in principle, everyone can do it. And in principle, you don't need to hear any secret teachings, because if you're ready, you will receive them from within. So I'm not holding anyone back. I'm really trying to protect people from premature knowledge that would not be understood accurately.
And he's right. People don't need to attend these ashrams and these churches and these temples. And if your heart is pure and you are a certain kind of being and you're ready for change on a huge level, cosmic level, you're going to get what we call downloads of information. You're going to start just knowing things. And that is amazing. That is amazing. I'll give you an example. I'm going to try to, I know what I want to say, but I'm trying to retrace how I got to even starting the story. I thought about if I ever ended up in prison, if I ended up in jail for a significant amount of time, like if I had to go away for 5 months, 6 months, a year, what I would do is not eat. I would not eat any of the food there, and I would purely just fast every day and not associate with nobody. I'd probably get myself put in the black hole, whatever they call it, wherever they put you when you're just super bad and they just throw you in a black hole and no sunlight and everything. I'd probably want to be there all the time. But anyway, I thought about, I wouldn't eat any food. Yeah, that's what I would do. And immediately a thought came through my head. And that thought said, you won't be allowed to do that. And I questioned that. I was like, what? What? Why would I, how? And I was confused. I'm like, but the answer was that download was very direct and very blunt and very to the point. So then I started to Google it. And I found out that prisons do undergo what they call hunger strikes. And they'll literally put you in a bed and stick an IV in your arm and feed you that way. Because basically, if the prison doesn't have prisoners, it doesn't get paid to hold prisoners, does it? Oh, I didn't know that was actually a thing. I didn't know any of that was a thing. But the download told me, hey, you won't be able to do that. They got it. They got your number on that. They'll put an end to that. So yeah, it's really interesting to get some of these downloads. Another one, I was behind a car and I was screaming at my mom to slow down her car, and she was like telling me, "No, I'm not slowing down. I'm not speeding." And I was just yelling. I'm like, "Slow down this car right now!" And I got really angry. So finally, she slowed down, and the car ahead of us, just the back right tire blew up, and the car swerved in both lanes and hit the guardrail and flipped over. And she looked at me like, and I just said, "Thanks for listening to me." That's all I wanted. And so, you'll get downloads.
But if one receives it from within, it means one was ready to grok it from the direct mouth of God, if you will. One of the difficulties is the amount of intense energy that will come through when one has let go, not just of the ego, but of the censor in particular. Those defenses that have protected us from too much knowledge of the presence of God because of the ego's traumas, shame, guilt, all of the negative turmoil that encounter, if made prematurely, would create, have to be dealt with through the moral strength to cut them away ruthlessly without any attachment to egoic traits, desires, fantasies, or any wish to remain at the level of the herd. And one has to be willing to go into absolute aloneness to discover that supreme real that is only given to those few who are willing to let go of everything else in order to get the ultimate treasure of the face-to-face encounter with God.
Now, what he's saying right there is it's something that I'm probably going to have to go through really shortly. Because I'm approaching that point where nothing I'm doing in the world is working. I'm not flourishing in this world. And that's okay. Like, I get it. I get why I personally am no longer flourishing in the ways of the world. It's because I'm ready for this. I'm ready for this. I've been scared to make this jump, because when I make this jump, guys, I'm gone. I'm gone. And if the jump takes hold and I end up back where I was when I thought I was Jesus Christ, if I end up like that again, I am not coming back. Not coming back to this world. I'm no longer going to be Hori that you know. Telephone. Who called my ass? I'm not coming back. Because that state he's talking about is a state of bliss and love. And when you experience that, you have no more desires, you have no more needs, you don't even need to eat, sleep, anything. You don't need anything. You just be. You just be. And it's bliss. It's like you're tripping on the best ecstasy ever, and all you want to do is chill and not even really talk to nobody, just be by yourself. When you reach that state, you don't care to come back on a live stream and preach your word. I mean, I don't see how the hell you could. You can't maintain the lifestyle that it takes to do that. You can't, to do that, you'd have to be going to work and paying some bills and have a house and a computer and all this equipment and then get on and hit the record button and go, baby. But when you're in that state of consciousness, you ain't going to a job. You're not waking up to some fucking alarm clock. No. So it's not even like possible. And that's why I find it really interesting that he's sitting here right now and doing this. This is an organization of people with a like mind that is allowing this to happen. That can all function part with some of their feet in the world and the other foot in full on, God consciousness mode. So like, I really, really give them props for what they're doing with this channel. And this channel's not even monetized, So, yeah, if that ever happens to me, probably like at the end of the month, it'll be a miracle if you guys see me, in August. It'll be some kind of miracle.
I think I'll stop there and open the floor.
So in stage 1 meditation, is it more important to focus on, let's say, building one's ability to concentrate and master the mind, rather than feelings of love that would be more dealt with in phase 2?
It depends on the personality type. If it is a more of a bhakti personality, then that love of God, even though it's still imaginary within the ego, will raise the vibrational frequency. Love, that's what love does, right? That's why people love to fall in love, even if it's a fantasy and an infatuation. For a time being, it makes people happy. It brings the vibrational frequency up, makes one feel whole, it satisfies that desire to be adored, etc. And for as long as it lasts, which these days love affairs have a very short shelf life, but for whatever period, it will create a sense of euphoria. And then, of course, when you're dumped, you're devastated and fall into a black hole. But to whatever extent there is some reality to that love, then it enables you to then rise to an even higher level. So if there is love of God that is sincere and honest to the level of the ego's capacity for such honesty, and a conception of God that at least is close enough to the mark of what God really is and what that term signifies, then there will be an inrush of energies that enable the vibrational frequency to rise higher. But for some people, that's not going to work, and they would have to force it. And for those who are much more, let's say, logically, conceptually oriented, then it has to be done in more of a jnani way and through an analytic cutting away of the falseness. And that can be just as effective, and for some, much more effective. And it can also be done simply through the desire to do such karma yoga, such good actions, that one releases oneself of negative self-images and self-concepts, and through a kind of prayer and remorse and working through one's sins, the way Santa Teresa, in effect, was going about it, will also be a way that at stage 1 can be effective. But it won't, none of those things will work at once one gets to stage 2. And they won't enable you to hold the emptiness for a sufficiently long time to get to stage 2 unless you have connected with the Shakti that is coming from the source, and you have created an axis through which you can return to that connection and continue to fill your battery, your soul battery, your brain battery, with an increasing amount of that higher vibrational frequency energy, and so that you can build on each meditation and get to higher and higher levels. And that's why it's so important to meditate several times a day for a long enough time to really build up the reserves in the battery so it doesn't get discharged during the day. But you could meditate for, an hour in a state of pure love, of the ego's level of love, and come out feeling really blissful, and then have some encounter with somebody 10 minutes later in which you get furious at them for something they do, and your whole battery gets discharged just like that. It doesn't hold. And so as long as there's an ego there whose buttons can get pushed, and you can get either angry or fall into some other negative emotional state, your frequency is not going to be able to be consistently maintained.
And that's why it's important to dissolve the ego. The ego is not going to help you on the road to achieving Christ consciousness and unity with God. You have to lose your identity. You have to let yourself go. You have to give up your perception of the world that was formed through the ego, through its experiences and its past, its history, its traumas. The whole being born again thing pretty much correlates here. Yeah.
And so one has to guard one's way of dealing and of interacting with everyone in a very mindful way. Even negative thoughts and curse words and just reactions that come from a chakra 3 or lower place will shift your energy and destroy the harmony that was built up. So it requires a real, true, consistent dedication to the protection of this crystalline vehicle, both its gross manifestations and its subtle manifestations, and cultivating the accuracy of its vibrational frequency to receive ever more information and power, and then gradually be able to open its heart and process everything that comes from the depths and release it finally until one is completely able to surrender totally to being that manifest vibrational vessel of divine consciousness. One has to be totally dedicated to that goal if it's going to be achieved.
I have a two-part question. What is the role of the soul in getting through these levels of meditation? Is the soul always on the side of the highest self, or does it play a kind of compromise position where it's kind of has some nostalgia for the ego, or some tolerance for it, and some...
It depends on the state of the soul. Not every soul is in the same state, so you can't speak of this in a way that will be accurate for everyone. Some souls are more ripped apart by karmas in previous lifetimes and the present life, so that the soul itself is not able to hold the energy. It no longer functions as a battery. If the soul is relatively undamaged, then it's much easier. You can The soul will function as the battery, and the ego will be able to be dissolved because you have a higher operating system already ready to replace it. But if the soul is too damaged to be able to complete that function, then you have to inculcate pure spirit to be able to do that. And it's not that the soul is going to be negative or contrary at that level, but it'll be too weak and too leaky to be able to do its job. And then you have to bring in the eternal light itself. If you don't have the Ner Tamid sitting there in your pineal gland, it ain't going to work. There's nothing short of that that's going to do it. So you have to be able to inculcate that divine luminosity and hold it until the soul is repaired or dissolved because it's no longer needed and there's already been a transcendence. But you have to go directly to the highest level. Okay.
Thank you for the teaching. It has been beautiful hearing it in multiple perspectives from yesterday to today. I was wondering how one cultivates its soul, because we have been focusing on how to defeat the ego, but you said something very positive today, that it could be one from within or from without, like from outside. And I think our approach, or at least that's how I have felt it, the approach has been with a lot of information, and it has done its job. It's making the ego trapped. But what about cultivating the soul, which I feel it's close to our hearts, and I have made all my bets that it's my soul who brought me here. But you talk about, or through the time I have been here, like the deterioration of the soul, and that it can get cracked, and now you're saying that it have multiple deficiencies, but how one cultivates the soul?
Well, I'm wondering why you're asking that rather than cultivating the Atman. You see, because you can bypass the soul and enter into the Holy Spirit directly. So why go through an intermediary vehicle when you can reach the goal directly? And especially if that vehicle itself is an old jalopy that needs to be repaired so much that you're going to spend a lot more of your life energy in the shop than you are on the road.
Now, here's my hunch. I'm pretty sure that the people who end up on this journey, when they reach that point of dissolving their ego, I'm pretty sure the next step is to invite God consciousness, as much source energy into your body, into your temple as possible. And that goes without saying. You pretty much have to invoke the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit has to come in and embody your temple. And when that happens, you'll have that more direct link to source. I can relate to that. I can relate to that very, very deeply. And I think it's also going to make people more like a carbon copy of each other. When everybody's doing that, we'll be pretty much the same person. We'll think the same ways. We'll just look and sound different. And that's basically what you're doing is becoming what the Creator originally made you to be, without all the scars from past lifetimes and karmas and all the damage from your past egos. So purifying of the soul, dissolving the ego, letting in the Holy Spirit, and resonating with that God consciousness, and just being and emanating love. That is our end frickin' goal, dudes. That's it. Screw that fancy car, screw that fancy house, screw the American dream. That's the end goal. Until we all do that, we're going to live in hell.
So I think that for most people at the end of Kali Yuga who are old souls and whose souls barely got them here alive and don't function to destroy the ego and help them ascend because they haven't got that power, the power has to come from Spirit. And if the Holy Spirit is not inculcated and manifested, then the soul will by itself not be able to do the job that you need to have done, which is the complete dissolution of the false self, the ego, and the raising of the vibrational level to that of God consciousness. And if you don't reach that ultimate level of the Godhead, then the work will have been in vain, and the soul level is not high enough.
But I have found, or at least I have concluded, partially, or learned that it's one's mission to reach God. That's the will that. But I have felt like that the process, and I felt like some comfort when you said that yesterday that being in the path it's enlightenment according to whatever you get, but the path seems less challenging in the way that acquiring that consciousness every time brings more retos, struggles. So I have found that through the eyes of the soul, it's beautiful even to like how you mentioned it one time, to admire a sunset. You know, that something that was long gone, forgotten, and just to see a flower, admire it, and I feel that also enriches the process. It makes it.
Fabian, let me stop you. I'm not going to argue with you. What you're saying is beautiful. It's wonderful. But it won't get you to where I'm talking about. So you're free to admire the flowers and nature and be happy at that level. What I'm talking about is something different entirely, at a quantum leap level beyond what you're trying to hold on to. And as the world falls into its final death throes, I think you'll find that you didn't reach an adequate level to be able to deal with the challenges that will be faced. And you may be fooling yourself. But I'm not going to try to convince you of that. I'm here to teach what I know is the truth, and you accept it or not. Okay? If you're at a soul level, it's a lot better than being at an ego level. And you will indeed be much better off, and you'll receive a higher level of information that may indeed tell you to get to the level of spirit, not just of soul. But that has to be something you work out internally with yourself.
But I was getting more in the question of the levels of the meditation. I thought I was starting to construct a theory that you get through those levels of meditation, reaching like a soul level, and then you go higher.
Yes, but what we're talking about here is, you see, the soul is a particular kind of vessel that has different elements to it. And the element that's most important is the heart. And we have to differentiate the heart from the soul, okay? And it is specifically the capacity to love. And it's not about loving flowers and sunsets. Those are easy. It's loving other human beings who have mean and nasty egos. That's really the question. And how do you relate to a world that is full of people that you don't trust and who make you furious, or who bring out other not soul-like reactions but egoic reactions? And unless we have the power to be able to relate with divine love and accuracy, Without desire, without fear, and without ourselves entering into any karmic enmeshment, we are not going to be able to rise to a high enough level to fulfill the highest function that alone will enable us to graduate from this school. That's the question that you have to ask. Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead. Hanuman.
I'm wondering about that readiness, and where does that really come from to be able to manifest the Holy Spirit? And it seems as though you can recognize where you're at as being still stuck in the ego and wanting to break free of that, and to be able to gain the power to bring in those forces that are the only way to truly go past it. But there seems to be like it's not a choice of the ego can't make that choice.
That's true, but you're not just an ego. Find out who you are, and then you'll get the ego out of the way, and the choice is already made, you see. So that's why it's so important to go into that level of emptiness where you don't believe what your ego tells you and the affects that the ego is creating to lower your vibrational frequency. Because that's the only function of the ego. Keep your vibrational frequency so low that you never have the desire to rise. It doesn't even occur to you. It doesn't enter into the frame of reference of the ego. Keep yourself focused on everything you hate about other people, and focused on, wanting to change them, and they're the fault, and blame them for this and that, or on desires based on fantasies of being rich, famous, or with prestige, or whatever it is, that is the bringer of jouissance. But all of those things are futile and petty and result in more suffering and negativity. And once you know that, and you recognize that the ego is a dead end, you use your reason and your intelligence and the willpower that you have to throw the monkey off your back and let the divine monkey enter, and you open your heart, as Hanuman does, and is able to serve Rama directly and recapture the lost soul of that is truly God's beloved Sita, and free her so that she can rise again to that level of ultimate goddesshood. It's that function that we have to save the divinity of our being, both the goddess and the god, to be able to live as divine beings together in a world in which there are no conflicts. And it's when you get that and are able to maintain that as your reason for living that you will end the ego's reign very quickly, and you will be able to take the throne of your consciousness as the master over your mind, and then blow out all the stops and reach God consciousness. It will happen very easily. You just have to want that and realize it's the only thing worth doing in this life.
It's a two-part question. I don't know if they're related, but you hardly ever talk about crystals, and you mentioned crystalline vibration and crystals, and the crystals in the pyramids, the crystals in the water. Could you explain a little more about crystals?
Well, the real crystals we need to be able to construct are thought crystals. Thought itself is crystalline, if it's a beautiful thought. And all the mandalas that you see and the yantras and all that are simply visual depictions of holy thoughts. Okay? And if you are sending out holy thoughts from chakra 6 and 7, and even chakra 4, you are sending out into the environment thought crystals that will be picked up by other people's minds, and that will have an effect of raising their consciousness, even if they don't know what happened or where this came from, because it was too subtle for it to be perceived by their conscious mind. But that's what we want to do, is send out the highest and most beautiful thought crystals at every moment that contain within them the remembrance of the presence of God that's actually built into the structure of the crystal itself. And then someone will encounter it and they'll have a vision, or they'll have an image, or they'll have a heart opening because they took in that energy in that form. So ultimately, that's all we are. That's all the soul is, really, is a thought crystal. And it produces other crystalline vibrations that come off of it that maintain its shape, its form, as that of ultimate beauty, right? The crystal, when it is perfected and without any flaws in it, in the same way you want a diamond without flaws, right? Then it produces those holiest of powerful thoughts that, when it's combined with a meditative Shakti-filled energy that comes within the crystal, the diamond and the lotus, right, as the Buddhists put it, it puts out such powerful energy that it transforms anyone in the space. And it can be even sent out remotely as far as you want in space, because there's no limitation. So that's what you are. Ultimately, the whole organism is a crystal. And the more that you bring in the energy of God's crystalline purity, the more that you become a pure, archetypal, crystalline image of the goddess or the God self. And that itself does the work of transformation.
So that implies that we all have in ourselves a
Which self?
receiver. I'm sorry?
Which self?
Okay, in our real self, in our Atman, I guess, a receiver that is able, or the soul maybe at this point, that is able to...
The problem is the soul can't do it, can't function. The ego can't do it, the ego will resist it, the soul isn't strong enough. And if you can reach the Atman, fine, but how many people can directly reach the Atman, you see? This is the catch-22. Mm-hmm. So the only way to get there is via emptiness. We can empty out the ego and invite the Atman into that space through surrender, through humility, through absolute love. We can call it, but we can't command it. It is only after that has been received and the recognition of the Atman has been identified and been able to be emplaced by God in that space of the command center, the Agya Chakra, so that that function remains consistent and strong, that vibrational frequency that is pure crystalline God and divine love energy will be maintained consistently.
Wonder if that's why some people have a lot of trouble when they claim that they've seen God and they felt God's love, and some of these people turn away, they shy away from it, they feel unworthy of it. I wonder if all this kind of goes hand in hand, because I do know people like that. I do know a friend of mine that has experienced God, and it's like terrifying. They said it was just absolutely terrifying. There was so much love, and they felt so unworthy. So this whole idea of like destroying the ego, emptying out everything to call it in might be like necessary, because if you experience God with your ego and in your ego self, the amount of love you're gonna see is gonna be so great and so powerful that your first reaction as an ego is to judge yourself, as to determine whether or not you're worthy of experiencing such a love. So yeah, interesting stuff.
Right, but it can't be done except through surrender and humility and emptiness, not through the power that you think you may have, because all of that's been exhausted.
So that's why there has to be a purity of intention, of really wanting to have that
Yes.
connection, say, to. Can I ask a second question? It's about the sensor. You said that that the intensity of the vibrational frequency, once the sensor is, I don't know if destroyed or
Depotentiated.
depotentiated, is so intense that it wasn't clear to me that the feeling function is let's say potentiated to feel absolutely everything, the negative and the positive, or the question is what happens when the sensor falls? You said that the intensity is.
If the sensor falls prematurely and there is still a lot of negative, demonic desires and energies, chakra 3 fury, all of that, if that's still there, then the intensity of the energy of God consciousness will be at such antagonistic connection with it that and if you have not yet chosen sides because you're still attached to that, that's why it was still there, then you're going to be ripped apart by it, and there'll be dread, terror, shame, guilt. It will be an infinite intensity of horror. It will be the worst nightmare, because you haven't let go of things that in the face of God's judgment it will destroy you. You'll literally wither. People die. They have heart attacks in that kind of a situation, or they go psychotic because they can't handle it. I know cases of that, so I can tell you this is a fact, and that's why even just taking a little too much LSD can create a psychotic meltdown. So one has to be very careful with these substances that will remove, at least temporarily, the sensor, and too much information and too much higher presence comes in which one realizes one is being seen, and you're not ready to be seen because there's too much shame about what is being seen.
That's why in the process of purification one needs to face all of these, let's say, demons or negative aspects.
That's right. And that's why we do sessions with people, to try to help them to release this voluntarily, so that then they will be ready and will be able to desire to be seen by God.
I have a question regarding vibrational frequencies. Let's say that one is able to witness, there's an eye that's able to witness the character being anxious, for example. What affects the field, the vibrational field, the actual anxiety of the character, or what happens with this awareness? Like, if there's a detachment, let's say, that you're just observing yourself acting anxious, to put an example.
Okay.
But it's not yourself, but you can't help it. It's just acting there, and you're just detaching from it. But what affects?
Well, you're not just detaching from it. The question is, what is your intention? What is your relationship to whatever the issues are that are creating anxiety? Do you want them gone? Do you want to offer yourself completely to this higher frequency in which there won't be any of that anymore? If you do, and you can turn inward, not just observing the anxiety and the egoic desires and fears, etc., but if you can turn inward, away from that, toward the source of your being, you will receive the light and the Shakti that will then be the primary vibrational frequency that will be able to dissolve the ego. But if all you're doing is watching it in horror and, oh my God, this is terrible, but I can't do anything about it, I'm stuck, this is who I am, and you're still identified, well, then that's the frequency that will dominate.
I have a second question. When you say, like, for example, a phrase like, if we are to save the planet, we need to vibrate at our highest frequency level. There's a part of the ego, I guess, that reacts to that phrase as like a blasphemy. Like, even though I grew up, like,
That's Christianity. That's
even though I grew up in that.
Blasphemy according to who? What frame of reference is that blasphemy?
In the sense that, who am I to...
You're a child of God.
Yeah, but if this is God's dream, like...
Yeah, because God has chosen you. You've come into this space because you want to rise spiritually, right? You want to belong to God. You want to be saved. And then to help serve the Savior. That's what Christ is called, the Savior, right? Do you want salvation, and do you want to help in the salvation of all souls? If you do, God wants you. God needs you. You know, it's like Uncle Sam wants you in the U.S. You know? God wants you. It's not that who am I, it's who are you to refuse the call of God to serve in the highest way. You know, that's hubris, that's arrogance. That's saying, no, God, I'm not interested. Go to somebody else. No, if you're being called here, it means that you are meant to achieve that. And so then if you deny it, that's your ego thinking you know better than God. I wouldn't want to meet him in the final judgment after have been blowing him off that way, you know, because there's no basis for you to think that you are not an equal child of God who could become a manifestation of that divine beauty, love, power, goodness, and energy. So go for it until you hear directly from God otherwise. Assume that it's meant for you.
I guess it's that it comes from, okay, this is God's dream, and if God's dream is to have the planet be over,
yeah.
Why would I be save it?
Well, if the
I think that's the logic.
well, but the point is, how it gets saved is in totally in God's hands. You're not determining that. It may be saved after a destruction. It may be reborn. You know, it's not that you will determine how it works. All you will be doing is enabling God's dream to be manifest more powerfully. You will become one of those nodes of consciousness that vibrates in accord with the will of God so that it will happen more accurately. You're not making any decisions here. That's why you have to be in emptiness. So you have no ego getting in the way of God's will. And however God's interest is in saving souls, not in saving the planet. But the world is actually the souls, because all the world is vibrational frequency, and it's the souls who contain that frequency. Matter will respond. Okay, that's simply the background of the dream, but the souls are the living embodiments of that frequency that can be modulated in accord with its closeness or distance from the source. So the closer you go to the source, the more that you can give that salvific energy to others who are dying because they have no energy to save themselves. Okay.
Can vibrations travel with sounds? And
with what?
Sound, with the sound. Can the sound like change your level of frequency?
That's a very good question. Yes and no, okay? It's analogous to that. And in a way, what we are doing is the same thing that a classical singer will do in vocal training. We're learning to hold the highest notes of the highest frequency, but it's not within the realm or range of audible sound. It's at a much higher octave, so that it is pure silence, but it is, you could say, on the same spectrum. But above sound, you get then light, and then above light, then you get the divine level of consciousness. It's all in a single spectrum. And if you are singing, let's say audibly singing or making sound with that vibrational frequency in the spirit that is motivating you to sing or to chant or whatever, from that level, then the sound wave will be a carrier wave of that higher vibrational frequency, and then it will function in that way. And that's why the greatest singers are loved, because of the energy of love that is carried on their voices. And what makes their voices seem so beautiful is not just the technical expertise, but the power and purity of their love, their heart energy that is coming through the voice. Okay?
So it's only from a person or someone, it can be sound from like music you listen to.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, it can be, or like sounds in the nature.
Sure. But again, most recorded music is not going to contain that highest frequency. And even the sounds of nature, unless you are perceiving them from that higher frequency, you won't pick it up. The frequency will be too subtle of its divine nature. All of this is God right now. If we were open to it, we would be in bliss at this very instant, and this would be the kingdom of heaven, just because we were all vibrating at that level, and the transformation would happen simply through that shift of frequency. But the ego cannot perceive those higher vibrational levels, and it will only generally see the grosser levels of whether it's of nature or of some art or music or some more artificial creation. Okay. Okay, we're over time. Was this useful to you, this conversation tonight? Okay, because there weren't very many questions, but I'm assuming that perhaps people just were not ready to ask them. But I hope that this is something that is considered very deeply by people, because we are in a situation where we are about to face the crunch time, and we need to be ready for it. Okay. Namaste.
Another fantastic speech from Shunyamurti and the Sat Yoga Institute channel on YouTube. Make sure you guys give that a little sub-a-dub-dub, and get you a dose of wisdom, especially when I'm gone. Let's see. Prevent mental sabotage. Listen to your soul. Discovering exactly. We're gonna pick one. Gonna try to pick one that's about maybe 40 minutes long, and end it on that. Ooh. Who am I? The realization that brings an end to karma. Free your heart to expand into infinite joy. That's a really long one. Celebrating the power of purified consciousness. Ooh. Bliss is blocked by a single thought. Ooh, that could be interesting too. Let's check this one out. Let's do the Who Am I? The realization that brings an end to karma.
Why does Sri Ramana insist that the only means of attaining self-realization is through Atma Vichara? All other techniques and approaches, he says, are preliminary, but they won't get you to realization. The only direct understanding of the self can come through self-inquiry, which consists of what? It's the simple, silent asking of the question, who is I? And if you do this approach seriously, and take seriously the results of what you encounter, you will discover that behind all of the words and images of the ego mind that stream across consciousness repetitively, constantly, and all the affects that they carry, behind all of those signifiers, is there a self? Is there someone there who is doing the thinking? No. Literally, the thoughts do not have a thinker. It's very important to get this. You can look, you'll see. It's emptiness. There's nobody home. The ego is just a machine, repeating the thoughts that it learned to think, parroting them. It will even parrot back spiritual jargon. But there's no one actually behind the words. And so it is the words themselves that create the illusion that there is someone there. There's an automatic presumption, well, if there's an I thought that says, I am going to do this, I will not do that, I want this, I hate that. If there is an I thought, then there must be an I who is thinking it. But there isn't. There's just emptiness. And so the ego completely lacks essence, substance, completely lacks a self. And these thoughts just go on. Not logically, not according to real reason, but according to fantasies and projections. And as every sage has taught, from Shankaracharya and Buddha and Jesus and all of the great sages, those fantasies, those desires that the ego produces, inevitably bring disappointment, if not worse. Buddha said remorse, but it can be devastation, it can be death. The thoughts are not in accord with the reality that one will discover, usually the hard way. And yet the thoughts will continue, even after that, to produce the same desires and the same patterns over and over again. The ego doesn't learn. Really, it's not capable of learning. Because it doesn't have intelligence. It's a conditioned reflex produced by commands that you receive from parents and society, starting even before birth in the intrauterine developmental phase and in childhood. But by about the age of 5, it was set. You know, you could add different strata on top of it, but the basic approach of the ego is determined by those commands and projections that one received that will continue, making you do things to try to make the other happy or to rebel against the other if that's the command that you receive, to be independent and do the opposite of what you're told, Whatever it is, you don't have the free will to decide that. It's all happening in accord with that set of commands. And the ego itself can't change itself. It can't reprogram itself. You can even go through 10 years of psychoanalysis and you're just the same as when you started. Look at Woody Allen. He had 30 years of it. You can see that no processes of therapy actually work because the ego is limited to those particular mindless drives that are based on that set of commands, that are about you should stay loyal to the parents in the family system, you should serve your country no matter what, you should go to church every Sunday, you should do this or that, or you should take drugs and go to rock concerts and do other things. And whatever it is that you think you have your own style and proclivity toward is actually an imitation. We mimic the others. You mimic the popular kids in school and you adopt their style, or you mimic those who you think are going to get ahead and be most successful. But there's no internal understanding of who you are, and therefore what is really important. So your value systems are totally determined outside. And once you follow those value systems and those orders, plus the omissions, the things you're told not to do, that you're not even to know, the forbidden knowledge, once you censor out all of that, your intelligence is crippled. Your ability to think your way out of any problem is completely limited because your repertoire of thoughts and logic and capacity to see through the illusion has been completely eliminated. You're part of the illusion. So the only way out of this trap of the hell realm of the ego is to realize you're not the ego. But the only way you can realize that is doing the self-inquiry and realize not only are you not the ego, you're not anyone. And this is what's terrifying. And the ego knows this, of course, and that's why every ego feels like a phony. You know, I'm just pretending to be this or that. I can't back it up. It's a bluff, it's bravado. And if one has a negative ego that says, no, I'm lousy and worthless and nobody wants me and they'll all reject me and all of that, then you'll go through life projecting and provoking people to try to do that to you, which you can usually achieve, and that will bring you back to a feeling like, okay, it feels like home, right? But you can't get out of that feeling because there is no one there to tell you this isn't true. This is also just a mask that you have put on over an emptiness. But the emptiness is so terrifying, you'd rather stay even with an ugly mask than no mask at all. And even though you know it's a dead end to follow the ego's drives, that will always end, as I say, in a sense of loss. But you can't stop it. It's irresistible. It's an impulse that the ego itself must follow. Because if it doesn't, there's a rupture with its own identity. And that, in an ordinary state, if there has not been the realization of the self will lead to a malignant depersonalization, as the psychiatrists call it, or a psychotic meltdown. And the ego is always only that far away from such a meltdown. It's very fragile. But if you can tolerate the emptiness, if you can abide in the emptiness and realize you are no one and nothing, then from within that emptiness itself, the power of the self, the real self, will reveal itself. And once that happens, that power dissolves all of those thought patterns. They are extinguished. And after the annihilation of those patterns and the silence becomes constant, then there is a flow of wisdom, not in words, although it can be put into words when necessary or useful for service, but it's a silent knowledge, a knowing of the real. And then one knows how to live. So the problems of life are all easily resolved after self-realization. But the ego wants the answers now. What do I do now? But it begins with the premise that's false, that there's an I that can do anything, and there isn't. And you have to get over that illusion. And sometimes you have to grieve that illusion. You have to mourn the loss of the illusion of yourself. But the I thought, the thinking mind, cannot accomplish anything. It's automatically within a false frame of reference because there is no individual. And so once you recognize that that frame of reference is Maya, that's the illusion, you won't want to stay in it any longer. But who won't want to stay in it? You see? It can't be done as an egoic desire to attain the silence. You can make affirmations, yes, I am the self, I'm not the ego. You can do that, and that may be an aid. But the only thing that actually works is the witnessing of the thoughts, and the remaining as the witness. And that requires also willpower in the beginning. But once there's the realization that you're not the ego, you are the silence, you're not just clinging to silence, it's simply the truth of your being. And once that is recognized, then the power that resides in that dimension of being gives all the support, the fulfillment, the joy, the love, the meaningfulness, and the ability to navigate life accurately. Because it's beyond life and death, and therefore it's fearless and desireless, and sees things as they really are. That's the sattvic mind. It's no longer rajasic, running away from itself, trying to be productive, make money, do things, get approval. And it's not tamasic, spacing out, taking drugs, watching TV, or being on the internet, wasting time, and losing its opportunities for growth. It's no longer falling into either of those patterns. And it's not living frivolously anymore for sensuous pleasures. Because all of those just create karma. But the moment that the ego dies, the moment you've annihilated the thought patterns, karma ends as well. This is the key point. The ego will create ever more karma that's in accord with its belief system. It can't do anything else. And that karma, because it's based on illusion and is false, is going to bring more and more clashes with reality, more conflicts, interpersonally, intrapersonally, and at every level. And so the more that the ego mind tries to fight its way out of a bad situation, the more it digs a deeper hole for itself. But once there is emptiness and desirelessness, there is clarity. And there is the peace and serenity that enables responses to be offered with poise, with grace, with empowerment, because the real will speak through your body, not the ego anymore. And the real will cut through the false very easily. The real is 1,000 times more intelligent than the ego. But the real only appears once the sacrifice of the ego has been completed. Until then, you may get intermittent glimpses, but they won't sustain you, and the ego will fall back into its tendencies, because they are lifelong tendencies. In fact, many lives-long tendencies that can only be overcome through a total surrender to the self in the emptiness. Nothing else will do. If there was any other, if you could take a red pill and be out of the matrix, that would be great. I don't think such pills exist. But what does exist is the realization of the truth that is yours for the having, just by realizing there's no one. There's no ego self. And this matrix indeed is a hologram. It's a movie that's already been shot. It can't be changed. But the realization of who you are ends the trajectory of what had been happening in that film. That's the meaning of the end of karma. Now freedom can ensue. But it's not free will for an individual. It's God consciousness. It's the will of God operating to produce the optimal, benevolent results. But so long as the ego wants to take charge of its own life and be master of its fate and all of those things that you're taught as an ego, never surrender, never give up, always hold on to the flag of your ego desires. Well, as long as that's true, then you're going to end up in battles that are lose-lose propositions.
You don't say, Shunya. I feel like that's kind of the boat that I'm in right now. Since 2015, I've had the goal to do all kinds of things that never ended up happening. And along that journey, my desires have changed. And I get it. Like, I'm having to learn how to let go of everything that I've ever wanted. Because if I analyze it from both a logical standpoint and now my spiritual standpoint. None of it is possible, nor is it worth aiming for. None of it. So I'm either clinging to worldly desires at this point, or I'm on the verge of giving up, letting go, and surrendering. So, yeah.
So the way out is in, and the inner produces a realization of the nothingness, the emptiness, that once it has been recognized as the total reality. This emptiness is not nothing, it's consciousness. But what is consciousness? Consciousness cannot be understood scientifically. It's not some chemical actions in the neurons of the brain. Consciousness is prior to body, prior to world. The world is contained within this consciousness, but it has no perceivable flavors or qualities. It is nirgun. And yet, once there is the full realization that you are this consciousness that's cosmic and beyond in scope, it's unlimited. Once you have dissolved totally into that, then this consciousness that seems like nothing and empty is realized as the vast fullness and the potentiality of creative intelligence that has produced this whole world, this whole universe, and more. And so there's a choice, once you understand this, between living a finite existence in delusion that is futile, or living the most meaningful possible life that leads to deathless eternal presence. And the one thing you have the freedom to choose is, which do I want? But you can again only choose it from that place that you reach through Atma Vichara, of the witness to the ego that sees the ego for what it is and doesn't want to live within that box anymore. And once you realize that, then you realize also you're not in that box. You've never been in that box. Emptiness can't be put in a box. And the emptiness is always free and awakened and empowered. And that emptiness is the fullness. And then everything changes. You can have all of that with all of the miracles that come with it very easily. But it's easy only if there are no distractions. Only if, okay, 70% of me wants this and the other 30% wants sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Well, no, you're not going to get this then, because you're still addicted to the ego identity. And that's why very few people achieve liberation. They can't make a wholehearted decision to go for the ultimate reality.
I just told somebody this today. I feel like I had half a foot in the world and half a foot in the realm he's talking about. And the foot that's in the world still wants a couple of questions answered. And I know that once I take that foot out and both feet are on the spiritual path, I can no longer go back. It's a wholehearted decision. There is no more going back. There's no more desire to answer those questions. There's no more normality. There's no more life as I know it. And it's kind of scary. It's kind of scary. I would love to bring more people onto this side with me. And that's the only reason I have a foot in this door right now. If I didn't have a foot in the door of the world, you wouldn't see me streaming this right now. You know? And the longer I do this, the more I slip into a situation where I'm no longer able to. So this journey is definitely coming to an end. It's very interesting.
And it's true, within the ego you can't make the decision. You can make it after you've done the Atma Vichara, and then realizing in that emptiness, this is the real, this is what being is. The rest is appearance. Appearance is a flux, it's transitory. Your body only lasts a certain amount of time. If you're identified with the body, then at death you'll feel destroyed. But if you realize you're not the body, you're deathless, you're eternal. And the bliss doesn't end. And the beauty and the goodness and the power and the creative intelligence does not end. But it belongs to the supreme power. It doesn't belong to an individual anymore. And the individual ego wants to monopolize, to appropriate, to aggrandize. You see this all the time with gurus who say, I am enlightened. Well, watch out. No, I wouldn't go too close to that, because that I is obviously megalomaniacal. And you see this all the time, of course, in people in every profession, but it stands out when one is claiming enlightenment. And so in your own sadhana, it's very important not to claim, oh, I had all these experiences, I am very special, I've done all of this, I'm very close to enlightenment. As long as there's still an I that's trying to claim anything, then it's stuck in a very low chakra that's filled with arrogance and conceit. And so until there is total humility that comes only from the emptiness, then the game of the ego will continue to play. And it's always based on those vices of attachment and greed and lust and arrogance. But the ego has a very hard time tolerating silence. And it will try to interrupt the silence whenever it can to bring you back into the frame of reference of the ego. It won't allow you to be free. And so the only way you earn your freedom is complete disidentification from thought. There's no other way out. Nothing real can be attained through thought. All the philosophers who are so proud of their thinking, their logic, most of them are more anxious and troubled than other people. Psychiatrists have a higher suicide rate than any other profession. So those people who try to change the ego from within it can't do it, and they get burned out and they become depressed and in despair because their careers are failures. So if you want real freedom and not just the fool's gold version of it, which you might get from having a lot of money or having a lot of sex or having a lot of plant medicines that bring you temporarily into altered states. But no one has ever gotten liberation through any of those either. Terence McKenna was as much in his ego at the end of his life as before he took his first LSD or mushroom trip. Didn't get him anywhere. If you want freedom, it's a radical annihilation of the ego mind that is required. Some people have very good karma and they hear this once, they get it, and they're done. Very few, but it happens. Others will take years and years of practice before they can silence the mind. But so what? It's still better to do it in this life and be free and not have to come back around. Because whatever sanskaras are left of the ego will pull the consciousness back into the body to fulfill those same desires and those same forms of attachment to particular kinds of situations. So the way to freedom is only one, and that is the silence that remains continuous, and when it's interrupted, one remembers whose thought is that. It's the ego's. I am not the thought, I am the witness. And you return to the silence until, without entertaining any thoughts, they are dissolved. They will be extinguished because they operate on a conditioned response basis. And if they're not rewarded by your being hooked by them, they lose energy. You breathe life constantly into the ego, and once you stop doing that, the ego will automatically become deflated and die. But there's no way to improve your life in any true significant way from within the ego. Even if circumstances change, the ego will produce the hell realm in some other circumstance. So, if you really get this, you will make this the highest priority and you will attain freedom. The more earnest your yearning is, the quicker it will happen. And it may be that your ego can't even desire it, can't even want this. Probably it can't want this. And some egos can't even listen to this. They can't take it in. They'll reject the knowledge immediately. But if you can understand the truth of it, and there's that margin of recognition that this is the path, then you'll be able to remain in the silence long enough to achieve the goal and be free. All of those of the highest levels of wisdom throughout history have said this is the path. Whether they've languaged it in quite this way or another way with different final terms for ultimate reality is irrelevant. It all comes down to the same truth and the same process, which is simple cutting of identification with body and with mind. That's it. Teaching is very simple. We're over time, but I'll take a couple of questions if anyone has any.
Thank you. You're very inspired. And at the very end, you now were just saying if the ego can desire this, I was feeling very, I desire it. And I'm wondering, is it like who's desiring it?
Mm-hmm. I think your buddhi, your intelligence, desires to be free of the ego. The intelligence is a linchpin between ego and soul level of consciousness. And it knows that there's a higher level and a better life and a better consciousness than the ego offers. So that's what you want. And when that buddhi enters fully into the silence, it becomes a Buddha. And then it is able to achieve the full empowerment from the self to be free. Okay? So you have to keep constant that new awareness, if it's new, but keep it and not fall back into the old patterns. So vigilance is required. Okay? But I think you've made a very important step toward freeing yourself. So, thank you. Yes.
I believe that this is the path. I'm totally convinced. But can you give me an example of how can I start my Monday after I came back from here?
With a silent meditation.
Yeah, well, yes. But next to that, in my ordinary day, when I have to be in two places, more or less at the same time, I know if I is the ego.
Mm-hmm.
So
a role will have to be played. Your life is playing out a role. So if you realize that it's only a role that you're playing, and be detached from the outcome, okay? Don't worry about things. Yes, you have a job to do, do it. You have things you have to accomplish, they will happen. But you remain mindful and silent and present. And pretty soon you will find yourself simplifying your life, where you only have to be in one place at a time. And, all right? And you'll make your life much more orderly, so that actually a lot of the time you won't have to be anywhere. And you'll be able to sit and meditate more often. Okay? But practice doing this while you're at work, while you're driving, while you're doing whatever you're doing. You can be mindful that you are witnessing the ego going through its role play, but you're not it. Like an actor who's playing Hamlet. You know you're not really Hamlet, but you're going to take, to be or not to be, as if it's some kind of, reality for you. But you're an actor, okay? So when you realize that, and that this is just a play, a dream, as Shakespeare said, that's all it is, don't take it seriously. Take seriously the silent presence. And the more and more you take that as yourself, the more power you will have to change the role so that it serves your goal of self-realization. Okay, that's it for tonight. I hope it's useful to you. Namaste.
Interesting that he said that, because I struggle with not feeling comfortable about my career, about being an actor, being on camera, being a spokesperson, being a salesman for products that I could give a shit about. And it bothers me. And it makes me feel inauthentic. And those feelings of inauthenticity can really knock you off of the high vibration required to maintain a godlike consciousness and Christ consciousness and the Holy Spirit. So what he said there was basically, to detach from everything but the realization of who you really are and what you really are. Like, all of this is a dream, all of this is a play, and eventually you'll start simplifying your life. I can see that that's kind of inevitable as you start to realize who and what you really are. You start to simplify everything else and detach and stop participating in a lot of the ways of the world, and you stop focusing on trying to get what the TV shows are telling you want, and Desperate Housewives and all that stuff that's on TV that you watch, and you're like, oh, I'll see all these people in these fancy houses and stuff, and oh, I want that. Like, you start letting go of the desire to have all those things in the world. You stop giving your time and your energy to this world. Or at the very least, maybe you still are, but you're detached from it. You're just not there. Interesting, very interesting. I think I'll stop it there. There's a lot of food for thought. I'm going to definitely have to digest some of this, and I feel like just sitting in a silent meditation for about 30 minutes and just to recoup my spirit. I may or may not be back on tonight, so if you're still up and you're still fresh, you may or may not see me. I can't promise anything. I can't set any schedules. I can't make any plans. That causes a lot of anxiety. So as far as what I feel like doing, I feel like taking a little break, maybe taking a little walk, and planning my night. I really have to start planning my night and see what I'm going to do. There's a bunch of things that I need to be doing, but I'm not sure exactly what to do at this point. I'm trying to do 50 million things just to hold on to something I don't really want, and it's very difficult to motivate yourself to do that. So the struggle is real. Much love, everybody. Thanks for chilling. Thanks for chatting it up if you've been in the chat. Till next time, I'm here to change the world. Who's with me? Peace.
Fighting the machine, fighting the machine, fighting the machine, fighting the machine.
Horishi Show. Horishi Show. To the